Because, when you're young, you start work, you start making money, you don't really think about like retirement. But, now that we're kind of like in our like late 30s, we thought, we got to start thinking about our future, maybe some passive income, and how do we really set up our future to take care of our families. And when we stop working, when we retire, how are we going to maintain without having a job? So we were thinking about investment properties, and that's kind of how the topic came up. In the talks, while we were saying, hey, we should buy a home, and we're doing all our research, we're attending like, classes, we're looking at YouTube, asking you a bunch of questions, and we ultimately decided on a multifamily because the income stream was much better than a single family for us. A few things that we have learned is that property management it's not hard, but it's not easy, right? Like when there's repairs to be made. For example, one of the AC units went out, and that was like $10,000 just to replace everything. Yeah. And that was like, oh my gosh. But luckily, because we're collecting the rent, and we had saved up so much from the last few years, like 10,000, it was readily available. Yeah. For us, our strategy is to continue to grow that equity. So if you're renting the places out, right, they're basically paying for your mortgage, right? All you just have to provide the down payment, and for insurance costs and taxes. As long as you're breaking even, we're just gaining equity. And in a few years' time, we can take out that equity, right, and then use that to either buy more properties or fix the property, use it as other investments, or use it for yourself.
Yeah. As long as the numbers make sense in terms of the growth rate of it, that can still be worth it. So there are many people that, right? And so there's all these different strategies. And then the other one. All right. So we are delighted to be able to showcase a story that's not a traditional one. A lot of people in the Bay Area, they'll be buying and selling a house for themselves. But what really inspired me to have this conversation with one of my buddies, Art, is him and his group decided to buy something together and buy investment properties together. And a lot of people think you can't buy anything in terms of investment properties, or some people say, look, I need to go completely out of the area, like as in out of the state, to be able to make numbers work. But fortunately, we bought a few, and I want to highlight this so that we can hear a little bit about their backgrounds, their journey, and their decision to make this move. So thank you so much for attending and joining. We'd love to hear about it. So give us a little bit of your background. Like, how long have you been in the Bay Area for, and what do you even do for work?
Yeah, no, so Bay Area, I've been here, born and raised. I was born in San Francisco, went to school in El Cerrito, and then went to college in UC Berkeley.
Yep.
And now I work for a nonprofit, the Korean Community Center of the East Bay. And we do a bunch of work with our communities and everything. So that's kind of my background.
Cool. Yeah. And then what was the decision like in terms of even getting to real estate? Like, did you think about buying your own place? Did you want to, how did this idea of even buying a rental come up?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. So we're kind of in a point of our lives now where we're kind of thinking about the future. Because, when you're young, you start work, you start making money, you don't really think about like retirement. But, now that we're kind of like in our like late 30s, a bunch of friends and I, a couple friends and I, we thought, hey, we got to start thinking about our future, maybe some passive income, and how do we really set up our future to take care of our families, and maybe stop when we stop working, when we retire, how are we gonna maintain without having a job? So we're thinking about investment properties, and that's kind of how the topic came up. And we were thinking about how different ways to invest, different ways to have passive income, and that's kind of what we decided, and kind of start our journey into real estate.
And then what was and walk us through kind of a little bit behind the scenes too, right? Like we know now how it unfolded in terms of the actual partners, but what was it, the same group of people that ultimately bought were the same ones from before, or did that even change quite a bit, like of the initial people that expressed some interest before?
Oh yeah, no, it's actually been the same people.
Okay.
It was just two of my friends.
Okay.
And it's kind of cool because all three of us have different strengths.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that was kind of important. And when we were deciding to buy a place, when us three were talking, we're like, hey, each of us have really good strengths. One guy was kind of like the tax guy. He does taxes. So he does all the numbers, accounting, and he's good with that. One guy is he's kind of like our bank, right? He has like the most money, and he's the idea guy. And I'm the people person, right? So I find the tenants, I talk to the tenants, I talk to you. I did all the people engaging, and that's kind of how we decided to team up and really think about, hey, I think this is a great partnership. We're really good friends, and we've also heard like a lot of horror stories, right? Like, hey, we went into business together and things didn't work out, but we weren't worried about that. We talked about all of the things, like before it started. We talked about all of the pros and cons. Like, hey, if there's a problem, we should always bring it up. Things should always be unanimous decision, and we wrote it all down, and then we decided to move forward, and that's kind of how it started. Yeah.
No, it's really good, and think anytime you go through a partnership, that is super important to have, and it's almost like a marriage, right?
100%.
Where you want to talk about, in this case, what happens if things don't go well,
Right.
or how are just decisions made. Period. It's like some people, in your case, you said everybody has to come to an agreement.
Yeah.
Some could be majority rule,
Yep.
right? Because you have three people. That's one of the benefits of an odd number,
Right.
where if and that's it's really up to the group to decide, like, whatever is the right way to do it. Also, it sounds like there was also some different responsibilities that were divvied up,
Absolutely.
right? So it didn't make sense. If you're the people person, why would like the numbers person or the bank uh, be impacting, like influencing them?
Right.
Like, you really want to have that determined up front. Now you guys are still in alignment in terms of what ultimately happens, but I think that's super important. Not just that you guys have the same goal and optimism, but also making this like realistic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it was optimal because, and don't get me wrong, like there were times when there were like, um, big disagreements on certain topics. I mean, we weren't fighting, but we were, it was just like debating. Hey, one person's, let's say, more risk averse,
Sure.
and one person's more risk, loving.
Right.
It could be either way, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm kind of in the middle. So a lot of it is a balancing act.
Yeah.
There's a lot of property. We looked at so many properties before we decided on one, right? I mean, as we know.
Yeah.
And we finally found that perfect one. And obviously, Spencer, you helped us greatly in getting us to know like the ins and outs, and like literally. This is why you need to have a good real estate agent, not just your team, but a real estate agent,
100%.
and someone who knows literally everything. So we're prepared to move on to the next step. Because if you miss a couple numbers here and there, like closing costs, right? What is that? Like, in the beginning, we didn't know what anything was. Like, what's an appraisal,
Right.
But these are questions that your real estate agent or someone in the know that should know and educate you on. And I think that's an important partnership as well.
100%. Walk us through, because you actually ended up buying a multifamily here in the Bay. What was, in the very beginning, where did you think you would buy city-wise, right? Before you really got down into what was more realistic.
Yeah.
Where were you initially thinking of? And then why multifamily versus like a single family?
Oh, yeah. No, that's a good question. So in the talks, while we were saying, hey, we should buy a home, and we're doing all our research, we're attending like, classes, we're looking at YouTube, asking you a bunch of questions, and kind of going back to your question is we ultimately decided on a multifamily, especially around here. We all know, like, Bay Area prices are really expensive, and, things can get very costly. And I think we got pretty fortunate where we got a pretty good interest rate.
Yes.
And the down payment was pretty reasonable. And we chose the city that initially we weren't even looking there, to be honest. And it was the city of Antioch, if I might say.
Yep.
So we were looking, in the Bay Area, like San Francisco, Richmond, El Cerrante, Oakland, around this area, because that's kind of where we live, right? And there were some great properties out here too. And then we ultimately were like, well, we don't have to, be stuck in such a small area. We can kind of expand our horizons. And we looked into, we started expanding to like Stockton, and whatnot. And then Antioch, we kind of saw a few places, and we decided on a multifamily because the income stream was much better than a single family for us. And this is specifically for our case.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 2-unit, 3-unit, fourplexes, or 4 units, and I believe after 5 it becomes like a commercial property.
Correct.
So we're thinking, okay, well, we're not ready for that yet.
Yeah.
So we're looking more at fourplexes, and we decided on a duplex because one, it was as our first property, it was easier to manage, right? We think, okay, we can deal with 2 tenants. We didn't hire an extra property management company or anything. It was just us managing it. So, okay, I think 2 tenants is great. and it was also a Section 8 housing.
Mm-hmm.
So, not to get to crazy details, but with Section 8, the good thing is that we're not really afraid of missing rent
Mm-hmm.
because a lot, like 90% of that rent is coming from Section 8.
Yep.
And as long as, we're up to code and, the tenants are up to code and whatnot. And so that was very stable.
Yes.
And then we looked at it and we looked at all the numbers and we're in the positive.
And that's one of the interesting things, like especially with when we ran the numbers of it all, because you can already run the numbers in advance.
Yeah.
Especially with what other people were willing to buy units for
Yeah.
too. And so you can already see, okay, well, how does that work with the current rates and or how much you plan to put down? And then you can also compare that to other cities. So even when you looked into like places that are really far out, like Stockton, some people may look into Sacramento.
Right.
I've done some transactions in Sacramento, and the numbers in Antioch may be comparable,
Yeah.
if not slightly better.
Yeah.
And you're not then having to drive all the way to Sacramento
Absolutely.
to do things. So there are always things in people's backyards. Like literally, yeah, it wasn't in Oakland and these areas that where we're at now, but it's still within 30, 40 minutes out.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not like you live there either.
Right.
The big difference about this is not like you live there, but if something were to go wrong, you can always easily just drive by there.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's one of the bigger benefits, because as they brought up, because they're able to manage it themselves, like the property management cost would have been another 5 to 8% a month that would have been taken off from the top.
Oh, easily 10% actually.
So
Like
some areas,
look into it.
yeah. So some areas even 10%,
Yeah.
right? So that's straight up the top.
Yep.
Right, not from the profits, but literally from the revenue.
Exactly.
And for them just to manage that on occasion, then that certainly increased that margin by 10% on its own.
Yeah.
Right, and so what year was this acquisition? And then I also want to go over like this went well enough that you guys made another move in the same area or ish.
Yeah, actually, that's pretty funny because I think this was what, like 3 years ago now.
Okay. Yeah.
2020, was it 2021, 2020, 2021, something like that. That's like right in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And yeah, so it worked out,
Yeah.
and we bought the place from a seller, and we noticed that the seller was selling the next door neighbor's house, right? Like literally, like how just right next to each other, and that's also a duplex, the same kind of same layout.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my gosh, this is a golden opportunity,
Sure.
like selling at the similar price.
Yeah.
And we were actually looking into 4 units initially,
Yeah.
right? So we're like, well, this is great. Called up Spencer, said, hey, let's look into this one.
Yeah.
Long story short, I think within a year, we bought that second property, and we literally have 2 houses on the same block, right
cool.
next to each other. So if there's anything wrong, with like if there's someone's like, hey, my heater's not working, or like my AC's not working, then we just send someone there, or we can go there and literally hit up those 2 houses right next to each other.
But it was kind of funny too, because that landlord must have owned almost a street.
I think he was selling the whole block. Yeah, like you were saying. Yeah.
Like because when you think about multifamily, none of this is all new in the sense that they're not new homes. So they're all homes built in a similar time. And when they built it, they're going to be building like rows of that.
Yeah.
And in this case, and this goes to the overall strategy, like especially over a long period of time, like some person, and it's not even a company, it was just like
like one guy,
just one person just owned like a lot of them. I don't know how many he owned. Like there was one I remember that we didn't get. Like we lost in a bid. Because it was still competitive. But we didn't get that. But he was just like divesting, and this is natural. Like when people get older, they may like, look, I don't need this anymore. I can use this money for other stuff or do whatever they want with it. But it's kind of funny too, like that this person would have like so many. Yeah. And he's not like the original. I don't think he's like the original builder or anything. Yeah. He's just somebody that just acquired them over time. Just like it transferred to you guys. Yeah. Now there's also only so many of them. That's the catch too. Exactly. So when I took a look recently, I'm like, even if you had the money, you had the interest today, in Antioch for multifamily in the last 3 months, there was like only 1 home. Yeah. So it's not even that much. Like these are not like, this is not like, oh, just because you want it, you can easily get it. Exactly. You still got to be patient, and you still got to just be ready to go for it. Yeah. Right. And so you guys have now own 2. given it's also been 2 to 3 years, depending on which one you bought. What were some like the lessons learned
Mm.
aftermath, right? Like you guys actually acquired it, and what do you guys think you'll do forward now? Because now rates are higher, so
Yep.
so the math is different,
Sure.
right? So what do you guys envision in the next couple of years yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. We were just talking about this the other day. After we bought the two properties, a few things that we have learned is that property management is it's not hard, but it's not easy, right? When things go like when there's repairs to be made, for example, one of the AC units went out,
Mm.
and that was like $10,000 just to replace everything.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh my gosh! But luckily, because we're collecting the rent and we had saved up so much from the last few years, like 10,000, it wasn't, I mean, it was readily available.
Yeah.
But the other apartment, I mean, sorry, the other complex, the other unit, their AC went out too.
Mm.
Another 10,000, right?
Yeah.
Because these are older AC
Yeah.
units, and they haven't been replaced since, like, I don't know, forever.
Yeah.
But again, because we've been collecting the rent and, doing our due diligence to keep a savings aside for these types of issues,
Mm-hmm.
it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, even if the rates are high now, we're thinking about it. Even if we're breaking even on the property, it's okay because we're getting equity.
Yes.
Like the main point of purchasing property is for us, our strategy is to continue to grow that equity. So if you're renting the places out, right, they're basically paying for your mortgage, right? All you just have to provide the down payment,
Right.
and for insurance costs and taxes. As long as you're breaking even, we're just gaining equity, and in a few years' time, we can take out that equity, right, and then use that to either buy more properties or fix the property, use it as other investments, or use it for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's our strategy. So down the line, regardless of where the interest rate could be like 10%.
Right.
But if it balances out with like the monthly payments,
Right.
these are good debts. These are like good assets. And that's kind of our strategy. As long as like the math works. I mean, as long as you're not negative like 10,000 a month or something, which doesn't make sense anyway.
Yeah.
You're not going to do that anyway.
Well, the interesting part is, even with that, there are plenty of people that are still buying those types of brands, not necessarily these multifamily,
Sure.
but in other areas.
Yeah.
Right. They're okay with it because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that are factored as part of the math. So while the cash flow is important, but it's also quite frankly more mental. Right, it's like, oh, I'm neutral, I'm cash flowing positive.
Yeah,
that's your own strategy.
Yeah,
but as long as the numbers make sense in terms of the growth rate of it, that can still be worth it. So there are many people that may have owned like a townhome before, and then they already have equity in it, but they're still renting it out, even though the numbers are still negative. They're expecting and anticipating that it will continue to rise, which that growth will still be better than the 10,000 a year holding.
Exactly.
Right. And so there's all these different strategies. And then the other one, and that's kind of the game of real estate when you have rentals. You have one, which is your cash flow. That's in the Bay Area. Generally, you'll be pretty fortunate if there is, but that's not the game usually here.
Exactly.
Number two, you are paying it off. So that is already happening as long as you're basically breaking even / surviving.
Yeah.
Three, there's generally appreciation. Like I remember, and you can do the math of your place, right? I remember when we first got yours in 2021, and then we're just trying to buy like the same.
Yeah.
It was already at that point like I think it was like already like 10% more or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like we were just doing the same thing, and it was literally the same.
Yeah.
Because it was like the one next door, so it was like everything was all the same.
It was the same,
but it's just a lot more expensive because things don't usually stay stagnant.
Yeah,
right?
And that was within a year too.
That was within a year. That was within a year. So
exactly.
So you have that aspect that helps, and then the other aspect, whether you're maximizing or not, is as a rental there is the depreciation you're factoring, which may help from a tax perspective on other things.
Yes. So our tax guy, we are taking the depreciation.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And there's a lot of deductions that you can make, like repairs, right? Costs of your mileage to go there to do all this stuff, and there's a lot of tax benefits. To owning a property. And also, and just like you said, everyone's strategy is different. So even if we're in the minus, like it does at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
if our, as long as we're not over leveraging
Right.
ourselves,
Right.
like, if we can keep the property as it appreciates,
Yeah.
in the long term, we're trying to build like generational wealth,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And something solid for our retirement and to help our families in the future.
Yeah.
So that's our strategy.
No, very good. No, this is hopefully inspiring for a lot of people. Right now, you obviously can try to buy a place on your own, and there's many people that do that. But in this case, like some people, like there's pros and cons with buying as a group. Like on one end, there is more people involved, so you're able to divvy up the work. It also does de-risk the investment, right? Because if they bought on their own, they buy significantly, potentially significantly less,
Yeah.
at least with the amount of capital they want to put in. But this allowed them to get in earlier,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And be able to have like some stake in it, and also quite frankly, a lot of the normal lessons that you learn as you actually do it, right? There's a lot of people that are like over analyzing things, they don't end up doing it, and then they never do anything. Versus a lot of people will just look, the math generally makes sense. You go for it, and then you'll learn things as you progress, and then you can decide, do you keep doubling down on it? Do you keep expanding on it? And unfortunately for them, they bought like two, and the other thing is time goes by really quick,
So fast.
right? Like the fact that I remember it was back in 2021 when they got their first place,
Yeah.
and it's already 3 years, 3.5 years
Oh
later,
yeah. Yeah.
and good thing that they did it then, right?
Yeah.
Because things have done well on the property. You got the exposure.
Yeah.
You've been accumulating more. You learn some, and then hopefully down the road there's some other ones. Let's leave with some final kind of parting words in terms of for anyone that may be thinking about either buying an investment property themselves and or if they want to think about buying as a group. From someone that's actually doing it, what would you say as a kind of a last minute recommendation?
Yeah, I would say, make sure that you guys are kind of like aligned. If you're doing it as a group, if make sure you're aligned to all the things, that you will be exposed to, the pros and cons. Of course, do your diligence, do your research. Make sure this is 100%. Make sure you have a good real estate agent, yeah, and make sure they answer all your questions, because
Right.
don't be afraid to ask questions. And I think, as you go along, questions will arise. And I think that's one of the most important things. And if you're a solo buyer, kind of the same thing. If you don't have teammates or partners, make sure you ask those questions to your real estate agent. And if you're a first time buyer, and even whether you're a second time buyer, there's still questions that will arise. And don't be afraid. I think fear is kind of the thing that holds a lot of people back. And don't be afraid to just jump in the pool and start swimming, because that's the only way you're going to learn. And honestly, it will be a good experience. And for me, it has been a great experience, with all the mistakes that we made, without the mistake. I mean, honestly, there wasn't a lot of mistakes, but, it's just been like a great experience learning. And once you have that knowledge, like you'll be able to like, teach others and help others, grow, um, for their future.
100%. Well, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you,
Cool.
Spencer.